This is part 4 of the Jurgen bartsch story told in For Your Own Good. He was a serial unaliver and he did some essay type things to his victims as well. And this author makes a case for why extreme acts like that might make us assume that they were just born lacking empathy or born evil actually still do go back to trauma. Jumping back into Jurgen's version of his story. I'm sure that the episode in the shop with her and the butcher knife happened after the third unaliving. I said on my last video that it was after the first, so apologies for that. But similar things, only not quite so bad, happened, of course, only with my mother, before that. About every half a year or so, even before the first unaliving. It was always when she would hit me. She would get furious when I warded off the blows. I was supposed to stand more or less at attention and accept the blows. But from about 16 and a half to 19, when she was about to hit me with something she had in her hand, I would simply take it away from her. That was just about the worst thing for her. She took that as rebelliousness, although I only saw it as self-defense, because she's by no means weak. And at such moments, she had no qualms about injuring me. You can just tell about something like that. Those were always the times when I had either offended her love of order, such as the front room has been cleaned and I don't want anyone going in there today, or I had talked back to her. This now jumps to the author of this book. I have let Jurgen bartsch tell his story for a while without interrupting him in order to give the reader an idea at the atmosphere of a therapeutic session. You sit there, you listen, and if you believe the patient and don't tell him what to think or offer him any theories, sometimes a hell will open up right in the midst of a sheltered home, a hell whose existence neither the parents nor the patient had even suspected until now. Which, of course, that is poking back at how when he was first outed for being a serial unaliver, the commentary was that he had grown up sheltered. So they're kind of that contradiction of he grew up sheltered versus he grew up severely abused. Could we say that Jurgen's parents would have been better parents if they had known that their son's subsequent behavior would bring their own behavior before the public eye? It's possible, but it is also conceivable that for reasons of their own unconscious compulsions, they could not have treated him any differently than they did. But we can assume that if they had known better, that they would not have taken him out of the good children's home and put him in the private schools of Marienhausen, would not have forced him to return there after he ran away. Everything that Jurgen tells about Marienhausen in his letters to Paul Moore, everything that came to light in the testimony of witnesses during the trial, shows the degree to which poisonous pedagogy still prevails today. A few examples. In comparison, Marienhausen was a hell, even though a Catholic one. That doesn't make it any better. I only have to think of the constant beatings given by the priests in their cassocks when we were in school, at choir, or, and they didn't even think twice about it, in church. Of the sadistic punishments, like having to stand in a circle in the courtyard in our pajamas for hours at end until the first boy would collapse. Of the illegal child labor in the fields every afternoon for weeks in extreme heat, doing things like pitching hay, harvesting potatoes, pulling turnips, and children would be thrashed if they were slow. The merciless way they demonized and called us wicked for being nasty among the boys. They said this was necessary for our development. The unnatural silentium during meals, I think that means silence, during meals and after a certain time of day, and the confusing, unnatural things they said to children, such as, anyone who so much as looks at one of those girls in the kitchen will be given a severe thrashing. One evening, Deacon Hamacher gave me such a wallop in our sleeping quarters because I had said something in the evening and there was a rule of very strict silence, that it sent me sliding under the length of several beds. Just prior to that, Peter Catechist had broken a yardstick on me and said in all seriousness that I would have to pay for the yardstick. Once in 6th grade, I had a flu and I was in the infirmary where the catechist was on duty. He was not only the religion teacher, but was in charge in the infirmary as well. A boy with a high fever was in the bed next to mine. The catechist came in, stuck a thermometer in him, went out, came back, and after a few minutes, took the thermometer out, looked at it, and then thrashed him mercilessly. The boy, who after all had a bad fever, whimpered and bawled. I don't know if he had any idea of what was going on. Anyway, the catechist ranted and raved and then roared that he held the thermometer against the heat, forgetting that it wasn't even winter and the heat wasn't even on. Here we see how a child must learn to accept the absurdities and whims of the educators without any opposition and without any feelings of hatred, and at the same time condemn and stifle any desire for the physical or emotional closeness of another human being, which would have eased the burden. This is a superhuman accomplishment that is demanded only of children and never expected of adults. First, Papu, Peter Pulitz, said, "If we ever catch two of you together," and when that did happen, then first came the usual thrashing, only probably even worse than usual, and that's really saying something. Then, of course, first thing the next day, expulsion. God, and we were less afraid of being expelled than those thrashings. And then the usual cliches about how could you tell boys like that. Something like, anyone who has damp hands is homosexual and does nasty things, and whoever does those nasty things is a criminal. That's pretty much what they told us. Above all, that the criminal offenses were second only to unaliving. Yes, in those very words, second only to unaliving. Papu talked about it almost every day, as though he couldn't possibly have the temptation himself sometimes. He said that it was actually natural for the blood to back up, as he put it. I always thought that that was a terrible expression. He said he had never given in to Satan, and he was proud of the fact. We heard that practically every day, not in class, but in between times. We always got up in the morning at 6 or 1:30, strict rule of silence. Then getting ready in silence, always in very orderly rows of two, to go downstairs and into church. Then the celebration of Mass. Back from Mass, still in silence, in rows of two. This is quoting. Personal contact, friendships, as such, were forbidden. It was forbidden to play with another boy too frequently. To a certain extent, you could get around that because they couldn't have their eyes everywhere at once, but it was still forbidden. They thought friendship was suspicious because someone who made a real friend would be sure to reach inside his pants. They immediately sensed something sexual behind every glance. You can hammer some things into children by beating them, that's clear, and it stays in there. Today, it's often denied, but if it's done under the right conditions, if you know you have to retain it, then it stays in there, and a lot has stayed in there till today. When Papu wanted to find something out, like who had done something, he herded us down to the school courtyard and made us keep running until some of us got completely out of breath and would collapse. He told us very often, actually even more often than that, in great detail about the horrible mass unaliving of Jews in the Third Reich, and also showed us a lot of pictures of it. He seemed to enjoy doing this. In choir, Papu liked to strike indiscriminately at anyone he could reach, and at the same time he would foam at the mouth. His stick would often break when he hit us, and then his incomprehensible frenzy and foaming at the mouth. The same man who always warns the boys against sexuality and threatens them with punishment for it lures Jurgen into his bed when the boy is ill. I saw that coming a mile away. He wanted to have his radio back. The beds were quite far apart. I got out of bed with my fever and took the radio over to him. And all of a sudden, he said, "As long as you're here, you might as well get into bed with me." I still didn't realize what was going on. First, we just lay next to each other for a while, and then he pulled me up against him and put his hand down inside the back of my pants. That was something new, but really not so new after all. I don't remember how it happened. It may have been 4 times. It can also have been 7 times. Mornings, when we were sitting side by side in the choir, he kept making certain movements so he could reach my shorts. There in bed, he pushed his hand down inside the back of my pajamas and stroked me. He did the same thing in front and tried to self-pleasure me, but it didn't work, probably because I had a fever. I don't remember the words he used, but he told me that he would if I opened my trap. How difficult it is for a child to extricate himself from a situation like this without help. And yet, Jurgen summons the courage to run away, which makes him sense even more clearly than before how hopeless his situation is, how altogether lonely he is. In Marienhausen, before the thing with Papu, I really never felt homesick, but when my parents brought me back to Marienhausen, all of a sudden I got terribly homesick. I was around Papu a lot, and I couldn't imagine having to stay there. Now I was gone from Marienhausen and couldn't imagine going back there again. On the other hand, I figured, if you go home now, you'll get a terrible beating. That's why I was afraid. I couldn't move in either direction. Near the grounds, there's a big woods, and I went there. I wandered there practically all afternoon. Then at dusk, all of a sudden, my mother was in the woods. Someone had probably seen me. I saw her from behind a tree. She was calling, "Jurgen, Jurgen, where are you?" And so I went with her. Of course, she started right in scolding and yelling in a big way. My parents telephoned Marienhausen immediately. I didn't tell them anything. They kept telephoning Marienhausen for days. Then they came to me and said, "Well, they've given you another chance. You're going back again." Naturally, I yammered and wailed, "Please, please, I don't want to go back." But anyone who knew my parents would know that it was no use. Jurgen not only tells about Marienhausen from his own perspective, he describes, for example, the fate of a friend. He was a good pal. He had been at Marienhausen much longer than I. He came from Cologne, and he was the shortest one in our class. He didn't let anybody say anything bad about his hometown. I can't count the times he got into a fight because someone had insulted his city. Because there's no such thing as a city, but just human beings who mean something to a person. And that's probably why he always suffered from homesickness. There's no such thing as a city. It's interesting. He stayed on there longer than I did too, because he really was the shortest one. He could never get out of having to stand in the front row at choir. And that way, practically every time we rehearsed, he got his share of blows in the stomach and in the face. God, more than his fair share, because the last row was relatively protected. I can't begin to say how often he got kicked and hit. This wasn't supposed to be some kind of hero worship. He would never forgive us for that. For he wasn't a hero and didn't want to be one. If Papu or the fat catechist had him in their clutches, then he screamed, blowing out his pain, so you would think those hated holy walls would come tumbling down. One summer evening in 1960, while we were camped out, Peter Pulitz had him kidnapped. It was meant to be a game, a lot of fun. But Herbert didn't know that because nobody told him. He was dragged off deep into the woods at evening, tied up and gagged, stuck into a white sleeping bag, and left lying there. He was there till midnight. Fear, despair, loneliness, it's futile. I can't say what he felt. After midnight, they razzed him, taunts and jeers, a game, a lot of fun. A few years later, he left Marienhausen, but when he was still a boy, he plunged to his pass in the mountains. He was born to be beaten and tormented, and then to pass away. He was the shortest boy in our class. His name was Herbert Grau, and he was a good pal. Marienhausen is only one example of many such places. I'll do part 5.